Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We are very excited to talk to you about creating momentum in your movement. And all of us here started off working on the 2008 Obama campaign together. Some of us drove across the country together in a tiny car, stopping in a lot of small towns across the way. And so since then, we have done a lot of movement building in our individual spaces. So I'm now with Expedia working on our diversity and inclusion programs. Jesse has post campaign worked as a speechwriter for President Obama and now heads up Common Thread Strategies, where he works with NYPD, Time's Up, Carnegie Hall, and a lot of organizations in pop culture collective to create movements and communication strategies. And Cyrus worked in the Obama administration and then went on to lead the Young Men's Initiative in New York City. And we can announce it officially today that he is going to be joining the Obama Foundation to lead the national strategy there for a Young Men's Initiative. So thanks for joining. So just to set the stage, I guess, first things first, we'd love to just hear you all talk about creating a movement and just what are some of the critical components that you think folks should know about to succeed.
First, let me apologize for just looking crazy in this picture. I can see it too, so it's really distracting. Um, so, in terms of building a movement, there are movements inside of organizations. There's movements in the broadest sense. We're all part of a movement back when you'd knock on people's doors and they couldn't pronounce Barack Obama's name. This was like 10 years ago. This was not that long ago. It was really weird. But the piece that I really grab is this is not scientific, but it's building weird coalitions, a weird coalition. And I specifically choose where I'm a speechwriter. I choose words very carefully, and I say weird because I think most people, when they're thinking about starting a movement, they're thinking about getting everyone who agrees with them motivated and together. And I think that is very much the flavor of the decade that we're in, is building movements amongst people who agree with you. I would say do the extra work to try to find some type of commonality between you and some folks, some groups, some organizations that you may not otherwise see as allies. In other words, if you're building a movement and everyone around the table agrees and is nodding their head at literally everything, then you are building a very short-lived movement. So, yeah.
And I would say, I mean, a lot of my work has been working within organizations to help them kind of think through this work and how to create real systems and evaluation and metrics around this. But the real thing is, whatever movement you're creating, it's kind of three things, right? Timing, because no matter if you have a great idea or not, if the timing is off, if it doesn't align with the interests of the organization or the group that you're trying to get to move in a certain way, then it just may not move. And a good example is this: I was working for Bloomberg on his Mayors Against Illegal Guns initiative, and we were pushing the Manchin-Toomey bill in the Senate, and it just fell through at the last minute, right? And then, 3 years later, I look up and I see a bunch of kids from Parkland, Florida, who are just leading this movement that we could only dream of having done, that was organically grown in them, right? So timing is really important. Interest, aligning your interests. A lot of you all work at organizations that have bottom line interest, and aligning yourself with those bottom line interests and looking at where your D&I goals are in connection to where those goals are, and then being able to paint that picture about how the work that you're doing can help reach those goals in a measured and sustainable way is another huge one. And people. You can't do this work without people, and finding those workers and those potential champions within your organization that you can bring together and form those weird coalitions is really the crux of the work.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And because we do have a speechwriter on stage, I feel like we should get some tips from the experts on communication. So, what role do you think communications can play in building a movement, and what advice would you give for all of us looking to kind of harness that?
You scared me. I was like, is this a writing test? It's like about to just hand me something. Like, you have 30 seconds. That's White House speech writing. It's like, you now have 30 seconds before this person goes on stage. Be eloquent. It's like, okay. Um, eh, here's what I'll say. Movement building without a strong message, and when I say strong, I mean um, emotionally relevant and um, I guess inclusive in the sense that people can see themselves in what you're saying is, I think, a really, and this, I'm biased obviously, but I think a really great way to start any diversity and inclusion process that you're in, for two reasons. One, um, you don't really know what you're trying to do or what you're talking about yet unless you've been able to shrink it down to about one or two sentences. And that can be a mission, that can be kind of your elevator pitch on what you're trying to build internally. That's the first reason. The second reason is honestly, if once you have it written, that can guide almost anything else you build, and you can build everything else around a core message. Um, Movements live or die based off of who feels connected to the messaging that it's built around. I think a lot of times we back into it, I'll just finish with. It can also be. We talked about this earlier. It could also be easier, more approachable way to back into a conversation about diversity and inclusion that often makes some people feel really defensive when you start. If you start from a wider angle to talk about who are we, what are we trying to do, what kind of organization is this, you can get to that conversation about what type of diversity and inclusion goals and strategies you're implementing without kind of running into that first slam door by some people who feel uncomfortable.
I'm a big proponent of, the whole, like the principle in change management of creating a momentum and going where the energy is. And sometimes the communications, right, whether that's, your principals or your VPs out there talking about why this is important, or an article, or, something on your internal comms channels, those can be something that showcases, tangible deliverables and movement that people can use then to build momentum, and while you're working on some of the larger components. So I think it's really important to sort of like identify those things as deliverables that you can build upon. So we do have, well, we've all worked a lot in the public sector. And so I think, Cyrus, starting with you, what are the main obstacles that you see for young people of color entering into the public sector, and or coming into the private sector, right? Do some of those things exist, and what can we do as we are working to build our movements to create access there?
The one thing that always is very interesting, especially about the private sector, is that most of the work around the private sector is building these supply chains, right, to get your product from here to there, right? The one place you never see that really is in HR. Like, where is our supply chain, our pipeline between the groups of people that we want to have diversify our organization and making those real investments, right? And so a lot of I think the barriers is really changing the mentality of leadership slowly, right? This is not going to be overnight. But the idea should be that we should be a much more efficient company. And what leadership hates to hear is that they're inefficient, right? Much more efficient company, meaning that if we're spending money on HR to go out and recruit, let's make sure we're recruiting in the places that have the people that we want to bring in. And let's make sure that that pool is being replenished, right? So one thing is the HBCUs overall attendance has been gradually declining. Some of these other schools and places where you used to find mostly women, and other places, higher education, that were producing the sort of diversity that companies are looking for, have been declining. So how could companies step into that breach, right, and really make sure they're making investments in that place? So not just recruiting at those places, but making sure that there's strong foundations underneath them, and making sure there are known pathways into a Microsoft, into an Expedia, into another place like that. Because the thing from a kid from the south side of Chicago wants to know is that if I do this, then this thing will happen, right? I always used to tell people, you're making it too complicated. You're saying you got to go to school to get a good job, right? what is a good job? Start there with this kid, because this kid is looking around them and what they're seeing is a dearth of jobs, a dearth of employment. And so you have to be able to help expose, cultivate, motivate, and move this young person along to a place where they see you as a potential destination for their time and their talent. And I think that is, going to be the thing that really takes down the barriers, because a lot of the barriers are just access to opportunities from these communities. They've been written out by policy on the public sector side, and they've been written out unofficially by the private sector in a lot of cases, because what we need is the talent now. We don't have time to develop talent for 5-10 years down the road. But eventually 5-10 years down the road is going to come, and then you're going to have a cliff, and then what is that? What are you going to do from there? So I think that a lot of the barriers are really just trying to internally get your management to recognize that we're looking at a cliff of talent, a tightening labor pool here. How are we going to how are we going to differentiate ourselves from our other competition in terms of, you want to come work with our company because we care about the whole individual, not just what you can produce for us.
Jesse, you've worked with a lot of youth organizations. What would you add to that? What do you hear them talking about?
I mean, he crushed it. I mean, that's exactly right. I'll underscore your point about line of sight. Line of sight is the first obstacle. If kids never seen someone doing a job, they don't know it exists. I'll also give you an analogy. I used to work in higher ed. I worked for Western Washington University. Any Western heads? Yeah, okay. So we're a very mild-mannered group of people. Woo! It was very chill. In that work, one of the things that we did to start to transform what the student body was to stop trying to just go into the same. This is an analogy. Stop going into the same kind of 10, 20 suburban schools and recruiting the same 200-300 Black kids as everybody else in the region, right? Because everybody does that, and I know in the corporate world we do it too. The other thing you can do is play the long game that you're talking about. Go into some middle schools, go into some freshman classes, go into some elementary schools if you can do it, and start cultivating both your brand and the opportunities that exist in your world. And when you do that, not only do you start opening up some eyes and people start leaning forward, but when it comes time for them to start looking for an opportunity, they remember you. They remember your brand. They remember what you showed them, what you did for them, and also they remember the culture of your organization, that you care enough about who is working in your industry to reach out to places where people don't usually show up.
That's really helpful. By the way, I'm saving 1 minute at the end so we can hear some secret stories from the White House. Would anyone be interested in hearing anything
Absolutely
about
not.
the Obamas?
Goodness.
There were not nearly enough drinks backstage. No.
I'm not gonna be able to go home.
So, sort of building on that, and you guys know I'm big into change management and how we can really leverage those principles to move things forward. So, as change makers, what are some of the things that you think of when you think of like successful quick wins, ways to harness energy to move things forward? What are some of the tips that you would give us?
I think we need to look at this as kind of a quasi-scientific approach, right? So the short wins or the opportunity to demonstrate something to your leadership. I always hear people say, we're going to put this great D&I program and it's going to do all these great things. And I say, okay, well, can you even get people to show up to your event, right? Until you demonstrate that to your leadership, really, why would I put any investment behind you building out all this stuff? Because maybe people just don't want it, or maybe you're going to come. So if you can show that you built this momentum, we call this event, we make these local efforts, and look, 20 people showed up here, but 50 people showed up there, and 100 people showed up there. And the next time, more people came. One of the things you have to do is get it in the bloodstream of the organization and the offices and the people in which you're working with. Because no email you send is going to make somebody wake up and say, you know what I want to go to is a D&I conversation today. Nobody's going to do that. Not even people that want to go to a D&I conversation are going to do that.
Present company.
Yeah. Well, it's your profession. So, but the big piece though is to actually say, okay, how do we start with an engagement that can show that there is appetite for this, and then take that engagement and give those people a task, which is to just go out and find other people that are interested in this like they are, and to start to build a community at the water cooler, on the break sessions, because that's how this starts, right? It really starts within the office and people starting to have these conversations and saying, wait, we want more, we want something different, and knowing from feeling from the leadership that there is openness to create that space. And so I really think, you know, it's almost like push economics, and I would advise all of you all to go look at some studies around push economics. I can't remember the professor from MIT, but he's a brilliant person, and he just shows you about how you can change people's behavior by just doing little things. And once you build that confidence of them coming to one thing and it wasn't terrible, then they'll come back to another thing, right? And really building it around the ethos of your organization. I think all those kind of things are like you're creating an ecosystem, right? So it's kind of you have to sprinkle a little bit of things in. You're gonna have to change the recipe a couple times, but the idea is continuous improvement within a space that you kind of can find.
I'll echo that. I'll also say, you know, a process, well, put it this way. If the first things you do is come in and tell people that we are implementing a diversity and inclusion protocol and you're all part of it, and here's what it is, and you just come in and lay it down, it's probably not going to go very well. The first step, which I think a lot of organizations miss, I've been a part of several that have missed this step, and you know, my own fault a lot of the time, is creating the internal buy-in and ownership over what you're going to build together. And this is harder work. It is just harder, and it is more complicated, it's nuanced, and a lot of times it takes help. So, but a process where you can say, and you know, sometimes it's overt, sometimes it's not, but where what your end product is something that everyone has contributed to, something everyone has put some skin in the game on and said, you know, here's something we want for our organization, here's how we think we should do it, and then build your plan from that. And once you have something that everyone is kind of invested in a little bit and has a little bit of ownership over, then you get momentum. So in terms of a quick win, I would say make sure you add that to the beginning of whatever process you're beginning. It's just to say, we're going to get everyone's buy-in, we're going to get everyone's input so that we're building something together and we're not just kind of shoving something on our staff.
I would also add in, I get asked, probably not unusual for all the folks in here, but an unusual number of times whether something I'm doing is worth it, whether it's going to be effective. You know, should we talk about this on stage? Because is that really going to be effective? Well, we never ask about that when we're rolling out our reorg, or, right? Like, is that going to be effective? How do we know? Should we talk about it or should we not talk about it? That doesn't happen, right? But that's fine. So I did that. So each time we have a brown bag, or each time we have like a town hall, or any kind of, you know, sort of offline event that you can't, you know, look at the clicks or the conversions or impressions or something like that, we put up a Slido poll and ask the same 2 questions each time. Was this important to your career development at Expedia? And is this something that creates a more inclusive culture? And, you know, over 95% of the responses are that it does. So now I have the data. I've brought the offline online and can justify why we want to talk about those things. And I know it can be a really frustrating set of questions to be faced with, and I'm sure we all have been faced with that. But there is a way to sort of bring that back in, and undoubtedly folks will find them useful, right? So you can kind of end that conversation really quickly. I'm going to leave time for that Obama question. I guess, you know, to just wrap things up, but what I'm really excited to hear your secrets.
Well,
I feel like I don't know all of your secret
I don't know if
stories.
everyone's seen this. This is a really intimidating clock in front of us. It's gigantic. They're not playing around.
What would you know, what advice would you give for building movements for young men and women of color, or just otherwise, if you knew that you couldn't fail?
Well, I really, like I said, I think investing in the institutions and structures that are the potential, you know, you can potentially leverage to try to reach the goals that you want to see in terms of diversity. So my big thing would be like, there's a number of hedge funds, you know, Puff Daddy started one, Rockefeller started one, you know, a whole bunch of people, Shea Moisture, Essence Ventures. There's a whole bunch of diverse money out there right now that's just sitting on the sidelines. I would love to see that come into some of the HBCU structures and some of the other, you know, minority supported schools, because that's really the backbone. I mean, it's really going to be the backbone for the future. Everybody who's trying to build below that to get people into that, that's great. But once they get into it, if it's not producing long-term outcomes and results in terms of them being able to get into a company like yours, it was useless. So that's what I would do.
Yes, I mean that is right. There are a bunch of organizations that are down to invest, but that don't know what you need, and they don't know that you're a potential partner, and it will help them on so many levels. I mean, you named a bunch of them, but that's I guess you could think of that internally as you're building your list of partners, as you're building your list of funders and financiers. Have you thought outside of the box? And if it looks like a very expected group or a group that you're really used to, then you need to reach out. You could need to reach out to somebody else to
Cold
help
call.
you. Yeah, to help. Well, yeah. I mean, then you need to reach out to somebody who can help you build your list, your call list, your meeting list.
Building on the last session, right? Just get good at asking for money.
Yeah, well, yeah. Asking for money that's absolutely true. But people just really get comfortable with their funding network. Really comfortable. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads because that is a real thing. People are just like, "This is who funds us." Get way outside the box because he's talking about Rockefeller. He's talking about Jay-Z. He's talking about cats who have built, empires of their own and want to invest in what you're building.
All right, we left time for it. So, I'm not sure who's going to have the more super secret information. Who wants to start? What's the White
no
House secret? What's
there-
the fun thing we don't know about?
No, should we open it? I mean, I don't know. Well, I'll say that we all were on the campaign together in Indiana, right? And Vegas. Were you in Vegas?
I was not in Vegas.
We're in Vegas.
I was in
They scared me backstage because they were like, "All right, well, we want to tell some stories from Vegas." I was like, "What? Some stories? Oh, from work in Vegas. Got it. Understood." This is going to be like a gotcha tape would roll or something. So I will tell two very quick moments that I have internalized as just special from the White House. One is something that happens occasionally there when you're working there. So when I think we were just talking about this. So when President Obama joins a call, when any president joins a call, it's connected by the White House Situation Room, which is kind of the military hub of the White House. And it's jarring the first few times you hear it because it'll be somebody who comes. You'll be on the call, you'll be talking. Maybe there's 10 people, maybe there's 500 people. It's like a stakeholder call, and you'll be talking, and somebody will come on and say, "Is this Cyrus Garrett?" It's like, "Yeah, this is Cyrus." Okay, this is Vice Admiral Adams. Please stand by. It's like, okay. You generally stand by for somebody who introduced themselves like that. Wait, silence, comes back. This is the White House Situation Room. The next voice you hear will be the President of the United States. Did you just feel it? Yeah, right? Isn't that weird? It's like something about that combination of words just gives you chills. And then he comes on real chill. He comes on, "Hey, everybody, how's it going?" And he's like totally calm. You're like,
It's a really good Obama impression.
Yeah. But like, it was moments like that that just give you absolute chills. And then the last one, I know we've got very little time here, but the last one I'll say is, well, the short version of this is it was a very big priority for me. Talk about building a movement. I had to build like an internal movement to try to get some hip hop stars in the White House. Now, you got to remember, in the beginning of the administration, like Fox News was doing like full day coverage of the fact that Common came to the White House and he's like basically a gangbanger. It's like, Common? Man, buy a single first and then talk about it. But it was a very big priority for me. So, long story short is, it started with Nas, and then ended up getting Kendrick in there, and it almost turned disastrous because when Kendrick and all of his guys were in there, we get them in the door, and they are very polite, very cool, they're very chill, a little too chill. Now, Kendrick himself has barely said a word. He's been there for like an hour, and I'm sitting there like, am I about to introduce this guy, to POTUS, and he's gonna have nothing to say, and POTUS is gonna be looking at me like, "Did you bring me nobody?" They're not gonna literally get us off stage. We're both like, Are we getting more senators? They're adding. They're adding. So Kendrick is like so quiet that it's almost disconcerting. So I have the idea to get him away from his boys, from his squad. Bring him upstairs, start talking to him, and I'm like, man, could you just tell me right now, like, why does this feel, important to you? Why are you here? You don't need to be here. Why are you here? And he got real quiet again and just goes, where I grew up in Compton, there are a bunch of little kids looking at me. They're going to see me today. And to them, the President of the United States isn't real. To them, the President of the United States is the moon. And I think when they see me, a kid from Compton, touch the President of the United States, they'll know that they can touch the moon. I was like, okay, let's go in right now. I think you're ready. But there's no end of kind of magical moments like that happen in there. But I think what I definitely, and you know this, I fret a lot about my White House years because it aged me a lot. But there were magical moments. But I think what doesn't get remembered is just how much organization and movement building it took, even just inside that little building, let alone across the country, just to get us there. So,
Thanks.
Mine's very quick. This guy right here, we're in the vice president's office. Like literally there's a whole banquet set up and everything else like that. And this guy's over in the corner dancing to Designer Panda. And that's like my favorite memory because I'm like, everybody else is like all like very prim and proper. This room is so ornate, and it's like this desk that's got like all these like Teddy Roosevelt signed, like just inscripted into it, and this guy's in the corner just dancing the Panda. I'm just dying.
you gotta enjoy life. And that's really, he just sent me the video of that, which I didn't know existed.
He didn't think I had it. I still have.
That will be bad.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up. No dancing here, but thanks so much, both of you.
Thank
for
you,
joining
guys.
us.